This is Sandesh. I'm the CEO of iceDQ. We are data testing, monitoring, and observability platform. The purpose of today's meeting over here online is to introduce you to the different concepts, data testing, data monitoring, and how this DataOps concept is applicable for QA people. Now, what is happening in the industry is it's actually divided the QA industry itself. Like, there are people who do application testing and then people who do or don't do data testing. So this is a forum that I'm using to communicate this new opportunity in terms of how to test data pipelines and how to get into this space. Or if you're working in a big organization, this will give you an opportunity to rethink how your data testing, or when it comes to data-centric projects such as data warehouse, data migrations, CRM, these kind of projects come into picture. The question is, how do you test them? So we're going to talk about this as we go through the slides. If you have questions, please type it, and I'm okay to pause where we can take it slow or we can go fast, depending on if there are any questions and whatnot during this webinar. Okay. So this is a series. Of this series, this is the first one. We are going to talk about fundamentals of ETL and data warehouse testing. The series will include, after this will be migration testing mostly, and then how to integrate DataOps, implement CI/CD pipeline to implement whatever tests you have done into production. So we'll talk about that in the third episode. So let's go the first one. Just to give a background, DataOps was coined in 2009 by Patrick DeBois, and his idea was, when we see issues in production, many times the reason that has happened is the organization has not focused enough on testing, right? So because you have skipped testing, what has happened is you have transformed or transitioned the code from your development area to production, and then there is an issue. So the reason I bring up this slide is I'm pretty sure all of you are expert in application testing, but then the question is, when it comes to data-centric projects where it is the data is crucial and is the oil and is the capital of the company, and there are a lot of things that are said, but then the question is, what are you doing to test your data processes before they are deployed in production? So let's go with this slide. Let's go to the next one. If you look at a typical data warehouse, you get some files or tables. If they go into a staging area, they might go into a cloud area. From there, the process will again take this data, load into big data warehouse. From this data warehouse, there might be extract going to a data mart. There could be extracts going to a file. From this data mart, there might be reports that people will be building on top of it. Now, with this thing, if you look at this, if you look at the infrastructure, there are two parts. One is the data warehouse, the systems where the data is stored, and the processes that are loading this data into the database. Now, if these processes are not good, if they are not developed correctly, then you will have a problem with the data. So our job as ETL tester and data warehouse tester is to make sure that these pipelines are tested correctly. And how do we do it? Before we get into that, let's see what a sample data pipeline does, right? So if you have a table, customer file, and you are loading data into a customer table, so usually there is some kind of mapping. For example, over here, I'm taking the name from the source column, then I'm going to the target column and say it's a first name, and I'm doing some kind of transformation. I'm saying split the first name from the complete name, because apparently the file has first name and last name concatenated. So you are separating the first name. Similarly, you are doing the last name. Then there is an email, and you're taking this email data, and you're just making sure when you're storing the email, you are trimming the spaces and converting the data into the lowercase. So these are some of the things that happen. There are many more complicated things ETL does, but I just put a sample example over here for you to just get into ETL or data pipeline testing concept. So this is the basics that we will build on top of in the next few slides. I will try to go to the next one. One of the key questions that come up is, hey, we are QA people or we are QA resources. So then what is the difference between, why should I learn data testing? And the answer is, This slide will try to answer that question. Is there is a difference between application testing and data testing. So what is the difference? If you look at point number one, in application testing, most of the focus is on user interface based testing. If you look at data pipeline testing, there is background. There are processes running in the background, right? There is no, most 99.99% of the time there is no UI. Dealing with few transactions, like one or two transactions, but if you go to data testing, you are treating with millions and billions of records. Here you are number three, you are testing code. Here you are testing data pipelines, right, or data. Number four, if you look at application, when you are testing, let's say a CRM system, you are testing that particular system. But if you are in a data testing or ETL testing, then not only the application that is you are testing, but you also have to connect to the source system. And we'll go into the details. So there are more than one systems involved in data testing. The skills that you need in application testing are mostly scripts, and in data testing is mostly SQL. This is another, I won't have enough time to explain, but the corner cases are identified by BAs. When you do data testing, the corner cases are discovered within the data. So there is a big difference between data testing and application testing. So now let's go next. So how do people test? You must have seen this. People look at data. They open Excel and then manually inspect. Oh, if the customer name is correct, the email is correct, and you really cannot do this because there are millions and billions of records. How many records you can test? Not more than 100. Then there is a legacy. Another legacy way of testing is what they will do. Let's say you have a data pipeline that has loading data into a table. What they will do is they will develop a parallel code in stored procedures or scripts and create the data and then compare the data. The problem is with this approach is almost you are recreating whatever the ETL team has done. You are doing the same thing again, and that's a lot of waste of time. There is a third approach that people do for data testing. What they do is there is a ETL process that is already built. Then they will manually create whatever data they expect to see, and then they will compare. Now this creates a problem. The reason it creates a problem because now imagine you are testing millions of records. Like now you have to create all those millions of records, all those corner cases, and it is very difficult to test this way. So if you ignore legacy, if you want to move on, automate and speed up and cover millions and billions of records, you need to think of a new way of testing. And this is where we at iceDQ ask people to look at rule-based ETL testing. And how does rule-based ETL testing work? So for example, you have source data. The ETL pipeline will move the data into the target system. Now, the way you look at this is to test the ETL process. I cannot really test the ETL process, but actually I need to, based on certain rules, I need to compare the input data or the source data with the target data. And how do we do this? We'll again go into details, but fundamentally there are A, B, C steps. Number A, first you have to run the ETL code. B, now you have the output data. Now you compare the output data created by the ETL code with the expected data. It might be in your input side, or it is something that you have manually, or based on certain rules you can define those. For example, the salary has to be between $50,000 to $100,000. You can create those kind of rules. And then the question is, does the actual data matches with the expected data? Yes or no? If it is no, then the process has failed. If it passed, the process the ETL process passed. The key takeaway here is to test a ETL process. You do not actually test the ETL process, but you actually test the data created by the ETL process. And I think this will be very important for you to keep with you, because this is the fundamental ETL testing. We call it ETL testing, but we don't test the ETL process. We run the ETL process and generate the output created by the ETL process, and it is slightly different than application testing. With this basics, let's move on to the next level. What are the types of ETL testing? So there are basically two. Fundamentally, there are two. So one is called the validation testing. So I'll give an example. let's say I have a customer, there is a process that is loading customer data, and the one of the rule is that I cannot load customer data without email address. I need the customer email address must be there. So if you look at this rule is in your head, and it is a fixed rule that when I receive the data, it has to have email. So the expected, see, quality is what? Actual versus expected. The actual is in the file or the table, and the expected is in your head. You convert that into a rule and say, if the file customer record does not have email, then the ETL process has failed. So this is what we call as a validation rule. And this is again very important in rule-based testing. You have to think in terms of rule, not what the process is doing, but what the process was supposed to do, and how do I check it, and you have to come up with some kind of auditing principle or auditing rule to validate that. However, there's a problem. The problem happens when the expectations are dynamic. What I mean by that, for example, if I have 100 records, then my expectation is I need to load 100 records on the right hand side. So it is dynamic. If I have customer ABC on the right side, I have to load customer, I need to see customer ABC. So the issue here is you don't know what the expected value is until you actually run the data, and that expected data expected value is actually coming from the source system. So this is where the reconciliation rules are used, where you reconcile the expected data is received from the input side and the actual data is on the output side, and then you reconcile and say based on certain rules or transformation if they match or don't match, and then you pass or fail the ETL process. Please keep the questions. If you have any questions, you can just put in the comment and I can look at it. If there is anything else, if they come up as they come up, and I'll try to answer the questions while I'm doing the presentation. Let's move on from here. So a typical data warehouse that we showed, right? It takes data in a file, loads into a staging area, maybe in a cloud or FTP server. Then it goes into a data warehouse. As I said, there is a whole flow of how the data is flowing. So what are the kinds of tests we need to do here? So the first test we talk is, even before I run as a ETL tester or a QA person, even before the ETL process runs, I need to ensure that the source data that I got is what I expected. Because if the source data is not what you expected, the ETL process is of course going to fail. So is the data format correct? Is the data correct? All those things you need to make sure. So if you look at the bottom side, source data validation. So that's the first thing. Then you are taking data from the source system and loading into the staging area. So if I receive 100 records, I need to load 100 records. If I received ABC, I need to load ABC, not A, B, and X or A, B, and D, right? So that is called source to target reconciliation. So you need to make sure whatever you receive is what you process. Then the data will of course will get transformed. So you will be multiplying, dividing, aggregating. So you need to make sure that the transformation, there are certain kinds of rules where you say make sure that the transformation are correct. For example, and we'll go into the details, but if you receive 100 records, transactions, and you compressed into one record, like aggregated the number, the transformation should be correct. So that should be tested. So that's the third type of rule. If you look at this rules 1, 2, 3, the source validation, source, all these are technical rules. Like hey, based on the specification, this is what it should happen. But if you are in a business, there are always some business rules. For example, I know it is a business that my discount cannot be more than 5%, or it cannot be less than 1%. So this has nothing to do with how the data was processed, not processed. So you are fundamentally checking if the data is actually processed correctly or not from business point of view, and that's business validation. Then there is business reconciliation rules. For example, you cannot have shipment without having an order. So you might have loaded the orders correctly, you might have shipped the orders correctly, but if the data is not there, if you never received some of the orders data, you need to catch those. So those kind of business reconciliation can be there. Then there are technical rules. For example, Again, is the report and your database in sync? Is the report exactly showing what data you have in the database or what you want to show, right? So these are some of the ETL testing rules that you need to define. So now the obvious question is, can you show us some examples like how these rules are implemented? So when you go out of this webinar, you have some understanding as to how to do it. Again, we cannot go into very details because it will take like a whole day, but I will try to take examples and show you one by one how this thing can be done. So for example, source validation. I have a customer file that has customer code, name, date of birth and sex. So I can create a rule to say if the data in the source file is valid. For example, name is not null, date of birth is in correct format. You can check the format of the file, you can data, you can check if the name should not be null. Imagine I'm loading customer and the name itself is null. So what I'm going to do with the data? So this is a validation rule where we are checking the input data. So if you look at this, here we have a screenshot of iceDQ, and what it is doing is I have taken a source data set like in the validation customer data, and I am saying I have created different rules on it. Completeness, account number is there or not, right? Length, account number should be of 10 digits. The gender should only contain male and female, right? Range, yearly range income should be between 4,000 and 5,000. Date check, date should be like, recently government tried to find out the social security payments, and they found out they are giving, I think, retirement benefits to 180-year-old people and things like that. So you need to check this kind of information. You can create this kind of rules to check if the input data is correct or not. And then when you run the rule, for example, you see in this example here, account number, everything looks good. See, out of 97 records, all of them are good. There is no success, no failure. First name is good. But if you look at last name, out of 95, out of 97 records, 95 are good, 2 are bad. Why 2 are bad? 2 are bad because the name itself is empty. There is no last name available. And then similarly, there are issues with the yearly income. So it is not only showing you, based on these rules that you created, it is showing you what is the issue and where exactly is the issue in the data. So that is the power of testing, and then of course you can take corrective action based on this. Let's go to the next level, the source to target reconciliation. Again, we take the same customer file, and now this is the file that got loaded into the staging area, but I need to make sure the customer code matches, the name matches, the date of birth matches, the sex matches, right? And how do we do this? Here's a screenshot. I know that the member ID is a common between the source table and the destination. So I said, okay, take the source data, take the target data, and member ID is the common factor between them. Now, I should, based on the reconciliation rule, I should find out, is there any member that I have in the source but not in the target, or it is in the target but not in the source. Right? You should be exactly, if I have 100 members, those 100 members should be here. Then once the members are there, then I can compare if they exist, like Sandesh exists on the source side and Sandesh exists on the right hand side. Then I can look at his age and last name and other date of birth and other information to compare and make sure it matches, or if there is a mismatch. So if you look at this exception report here, what is happening is, if you see the diff between the source and target, there are there were how many records? There is 4976 plus 24. There were, I don't have the number here, but there were roughly this many numbers. Out of the 24 records, there are issues. What is the issue with the record? It is saying that this member ID exists in the source, but it didn't get populated in the target side, right? So there is an issue here. In the DipGen, there are 24 issues. That is a problem. Then, so there are less records than that is in the source by 24. If you look at this email here, they're saying there are 15 email issues. I think, I don't know exactly what the issue is, what the rule was here, but there are about 15 email records. There are issues in the system. Now, if you look at the date format here, right? there is 1000. So there is probably one of the rule which says the date cannot be so old. It's year 1000. We didn't exist. There was no database. So there is something, no one was born on this date, right? So there is some issue with the date of birth as well. With the reconciliation rule, if you look at this, 1964 is the source, but the loaded date is 1000, 0101. So there was some issue during the ETL process that created this system. In the source is different and the target date is different. There are different records. So the example here it is showing is not only the record has to match, but also the values within the record has to match, and you can test and certify that with the iceDQ platform or by doing data testing. Now let's go faster. You can also do ETL is basically ETL transformation reconciliation. Here, let's say I am taking transaction, but I am creating end of day summary. So sum of today's transaction quantity should match to the sales amount. If I did 100 transactions, $1 each, so then there will be 100 transactions on left hand side. On the right hand side, there will be only one end of day $100, right? Because each transaction of $1. So I should see $100 here. So I can compare this and check if the data matches or not match. Business validation. Now we did three. We did source validation, we did source target, we did ETL. Now we are going to do business validation. In business validation, I don't care what the ETL did, but I need to make sure that the data is valid for my business use, as I talked earlier. For example, I could have a net amount. What is net amount? Net amount is gross amount minus commission minus taxes minus fees, right? So if I subtract commissions and taxes and fees from gross amount, I should get net amount. So this is where a business rule. Now this has nothing to do with what the ETL process did or didn't do, what I was supposed to do. I know from my business as a business owner, I know what it should be, and that's what I'm asking it to check. And if that check fails, I know there is a problem with the processing system. Either we didn't receive the data, or the data was not processed correctly, or maybe the business requirement itself was given wrong. Then here's a business reconciliation. So if you did a sales transaction, then only you can do a shipment. So here we are checking if I have a shipment and there is an order number. Is there an order here? Is there a transaction ID exist for this shipment? Because you cannot have an order here which doesn't exist in the sales transaction table. Now again, this is very important to understand. The business reconciliation is different from data ETL reconciliation, because here we are not checking if the process was done correctly, because it is possible that I received the shipment data, I received the sales transaction data, I processed it all correctly, but for certain shipment I never received the transaction data, right? So these kind of issues you want to catch with business reconciliation. Then if you go into the report, so if a report is showing net amount or something, like I know the sales amount cannot be zero, so I can create those kind of rules to check if there are any issues in the BI reports, right? And the iceDQ platform can actually connect to your business report and go to the database and do all those kind of comparisons. So this is the reconciliation part where this iceDQ platform is going to the database and connecting the report and comparing the values and finding out if there is any issues with the data. Now we can keep going into this system, but the key takeaway for all of us over here, one is, and I want to open up this for questions at this point, is if you look at the data, there is large amount of data that you are processing. So the way you test application versus how you test ETL process is different. There you saw that we had to do reconciliation rules, right? So you can have different sources. For example, you are reading from flat file which is on a FTP server, and then it is getting loaded into a database which is a Snowflake database, right? Then there could be another questions, like for example multiple formats. When you are doing data testing or ETL and data warehouse testing, it could be, hey, I have data in a SQL server which is different format, then I have data in a file which will be different format, I can have data in Snowflake which will be in different format, I can have JSON, I can have XML. So there are a lot of different types of processes that can happen. So we want to make sure that those kind of systems we need to support when you are doing ETL and data warehouse testing. The number of data processes, if you do application testing, there might be few processes here and there, but here you have thousands and thousands of data processes that you are testing. There is, for example, if you take a CRM system, there will be customer data, there will be orders data, there will be shipping data, there will be accounts data, there will be so many processes that are loading data that you need to test. That's one of the things you need to take care of. Process orchestration. Another key point here is, if you think about where can a ETL process can go wrong. Let's say your developer has developed the ETL process correctly, but that doesn't mean that even if it is developed correctly, if it is not scheduled correctly, it is not orchestrated correctly. Let's say you loaded shipments and before orders, your shipment data will be wrong because you don't have the orders data. You have to load the orders and then you have to load the shipment. Or before you load orders, you need to load the customer data, because how will you have a customer ID if the customer data is not loaded? So that will be empty. So these are some of the issues that come up when you are dealing with the ETL testing or data warehouse testing. The data integration, right? So you get data from multiple sources. So how do you integrate? How do you take let's say, for example, there are two kinds of integration. One is, I have some customers are coming from online system and some customers are coming from the downstream system, so or a point of sale system. So now you are integrating that data. How do you test that? Or you are getting customer information from one system and customer address and shipping detail is coming from another system. So there are that's vertical and horizontal integration. So all this integration testing you have to do. Then if you look at regression testing, okay, you tested it once. How do you test it again? If you manually test it, you can't do that. You have to. So you need these rules to be created and stored in some places and deal with it. The other issue is dynamic nature of the data. As I said, what is actual versus expected totally depends on what is fed into the system. So you have to deal with the dynamic nature of ETL testing and data warehouse testing, because if it is every time you load the data, it might be process the ETL system or execute the ETL process, the data might be different. So you need to incorporate those things into your consideration. Then another issue is, this is very unique to data warehousing and ETL, is what you call as incremental load. So first time you received million records, but every day only few customers are added or few transactions are done. So you're only dealing with the incremental load. So you need to deal with, how do you test incremental load? So initially you have 100 records, there are millions of records in the system, but the new record that were introduced are only 100. How do you deal with it? And then you need some kind of method to look at these exceptions, because without having these exceptions that you can get, like where exactly the exception says, you cannot test the system. You cannot take corrective action. So to conclude and to open this forum for questions, if you are in the QA field, data is becoming important. If data is important, what are the things that are coming in the data? All right. So there are opportunities in data testing. We call it ETL data warehouse testing, cloud data migration testing, BI report testing, big data lake testing, system migration testing, and of course there is data modeling and data observability and other areas. And we'll talk as we go into the next few webinars as we do. But at this point, Anna, I would like to open the forum for questions. If anybody needs any elaboration on any topic, I can do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandesh, for this wonderful lecture. Everyone, if you have questions, please type it in the chat and I will read them. Also, my question is actually about the, let's say, so the job. Yeah. Where can people learn that there is a lot of different testing that is listed here?
Yeah.
And I am sure when I was in testing, say like 10 years ago, the ETL was the domain of data admins. And we had DB admins and they've been doing this. Is something happening now that all these skills become part of QA skill set? Do you see a difference?
There is a difference. See, fundamentally, earlier the issue was ETL was new. Like this started in 2000, 1997, around that time, right? Or 2000, right? QA is there since the mainframe time, right? 1970s. Okay. But the ETL and data warehousing came later. Let's say 2000 is like where it started coming up. And then the people who come from database or data warehouse side, they don't have understanding of quality assurance, right? And the people who come from QA side don't have the understanding of ETL or data warehousing on the other side. So there is a gap. And one of the way we have tried to deal with the gap is we have created a website. There is a university.icedq.com where you can get trainings and all that right now. And we are trying to make it more happen. And we can send the link to participants. But fundamentally, there are two reasons for the gap. One is it started later. QA is much older than data warehousing. The second thing is the technical gap between these two teams, the data team and the QA team. And it has become important right now because of the everything is AI, generative AI, this AI, right? Data-driven decision making. We are able to capture so much of data that we have a lot of access to data, but we need to make sure that the data that I am taking decision is correct. So how do you do that? You build better systems and you test better the systems in a better way, and then you run the systems and you monitor the system. Questions?
Are there any other questions? If not, then I have a few more. So one of the things with QA professional now is everybody saying that you need to use tools, you have to be test automation savvy, and not just learning to code, but maybe be more technical. For the data testing, how technical should you be? What are the necessary skill sets?
Okay, so there are two things: skill set and tools. Okay, so before I go into the skill set, even if you have skill set, if you don't have the tools, it is almost impossible to test any data pipeline. Because, for example, if the data is in the file and the other data is in the database, without a tool, you cannot compare that, right? So you need some. You cannot even if you have skill, you can't test millions and billions of records. Now, so you need a tool. The second thing is, if the skill set, you need to know basic SQL, then you need to know, understand a little bit of ETL, like what kind of ETL patterns are there, and then you need to take course in ETL testing or database testing, which is free, or you can take it at our website. These are the three things: SQL, understanding of little bit of understanding of ETL, and then you need some kind of training on ETL testing concept. Because the concept that we are bringing is like it's rules-based testing, right? There is also, you can do manual testing. There is a pseudocode testing. There is golden copy way of testing. Becomes very difficult to test. So you need SQL, ETL understanding, and then the third is training on data testing concept.
The tester needs to know this. And number two is because so much will be AI agentized, let's say. So there will be much more power for testers to do more. So I understand that it used to be a separation of two different fields. As I said, it used to be that DB admins do all the testing, but that's because they didn't have the tools, right? And we didn't have enough time, tools, specialty to like go into that as well. From my perspective, I was the head of QA, and we had the golden copy. Because that's how you test database. There is certain things that the testing group has to do anyway. We want to know what's in there. We do the database testing. We did the SQL. Everybody had to know SQL. I don't know about now, but 10, 15 years ago, everybody had to. So you had to work with database. It's really exciting for me to hear that the testers will be more empowered to go into different areas that they didn't go before because of time or skills, Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to your vision.
Yeah, I think Joan Hart is saying data tester, right? The AI agent is exciting. Yes, it is exciting. It's scary also. It is everything all in one. But it is going there. After this series is over, I think the next series we'll have is like how our AI will transition because there will be another layer. So think about this, right? The platform is there, and between the tester, let's say I'm the tester and the platform, there is a middleman now. The agent is sitting there, the AI is sitting there, and I'm talking to it rather than talking or working on the software. You'll see.
Maybe our future webinars will be with AI agents too, because
Yeah.
a lot of knowledge sharing should be also. AI is amazing for knowledge sharing, for the structuring, for the education. I'm using it too, and I find it's very powerful.
Yeah, I see. I think one of the points somebody raised is the quality
Yes.
of AI. All these problems, there will be initially a lot of problems and hiccups, but they are just transient. They will go away, and the system will mature, and AI is taking over. It's just a question of if, but when.
Yes. And this when is probably happening this year already.
Yes.
And Jolene said that the quality of AI will be very important, of course. How is your tools working with the AI at all?
Basically, think about this, right? I can't discuss a lot of details here, but fundamentally, they work hand in hand, right? Let's say I hire you as a carpenter, right? You still need tools, right? I can't just say now I've hired you now cut the wood, right? You need tools to cut the wood, right? So you still need tools, right? And you other one side, right? And the other side, you need somebody to tell it what to do. So that's where the QA people come into picture.
So it seems to me that there's a lot of opportunities opening up with empowering our tools for AI.
Yes, three things, right? Opportunity for people, but the role will change. It will go from doing to managing. The doing part will be done by the AI, and the tools will be actually the who do it, right? So that's how it's going to change.
I don't know if managing the right word, supervising, probably controlling, yes.
Yes, supervising, instructing, right?
Oh, wow.
They call it
Bright future.
they call it prompt engineering right now. So prompting.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
You have to tell it what you want, right? Otherwise, it won't do it.
It's true. And also, you have to know how to prompt it in a way that you don't make mistakes, because it will make mistakes if you make mistakes.
Yeah, but that's part of the game. It is going to do mistake. You're going to do mistake, and you will catch 99.99%, 1.001% or 0.1%. There will be issues, and it's part of the life. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this exciting lecture and for glimpse into the future, which is a very near future. I am sure we will be continuing this conversation in our third lecture. Again, everyone, if you didn't catch this lecture, then it's okay. It will be recorded, and you can join us anytime you want for the second or the third lecture.
Thank you.
I want to thank Sandesh for this amazing opportunity to explore new skills that will be a foundation of the testing of tomorrow, I am sure, because AI relies on big data. So everybody learn, listen. You get second and third sessions are also webinars in the same way how you did invited to this one. Innovate QA events hosting all three sessions. So go back to our meetup page, and the next one will be in 1 month, and then the next ones will be in June. So one in May and one in June. Yeah, it's all our webinars. So please register now. Okay. And I want to remind everybody that Innovate QA Seattle conference is June 6th. Don't miss it. It's going to be great. We will be talking about the future of testing and management and leadership, and a lot of hands-on sessions as well. So innovateqaevents.com is your if your conference registration, please come and join us. Thank you very much, and I'm gonna stop the recording right now. And I appreciate everybody who came, and Sandesh Gawande for amazing lecture.
Thank you. Thank you for the time.